Welcome, everyone, to the Evolving Man podcast. My name is Alan DeMonto, and I'm the founder and host of the Awakened Man. Have you ever had the experience of a life-changing event that left you questioning life's biggest questions, on purpose and direction? Maybe and maybe not. But the thing is that we don't need to wait for something dramatic to occur before changing course. And today we're going to unpack how you can live an unconstrained life. But before we get into all that, ladies and gentlemen, I'll touch on and remind you about our Band of Brothers. This is our mentoring group program where strong, resilient men get together. We're dedicated not only to our own growth, but the growth of our brothers as well. And while, guys, that's a great, phenomenal program, we're getting awesome results. If you're really interested in raising the levels of your standards of how you show up as a father, a husband, entrepreneur, then I encourage you to participate in our Heroes Quest. It's a 90-day mentoring program that's aimed to improve at least one aspect in your life. Now, you can find all of this at the Awakened Man Training Academy at members.theawakenedman.net. But with that, let's get on with today's episode.
Today's man knows who he is, where he stands, and what he aspires to become. Solid in his convictions, owner of his destiny, ever evolving into husbands and fathers our wives and children expect and deserve. We are the masters of our life and the leaders of our homes and community. Welcome to the movement. Stay strong, my brother.
So as you know, I always like to start off with a couple of questions just to get us to set the stage and think about what we're going to be talking about today. And so my first question for you to consider is, what is your definition of financial stability? And if you have that definition, how do you know when you're going to get there? Well, regardless of how you may have answered that question, I suspect all of us have differing definitions of what financial stability means and looks like. And getting there is going to vary as well, won't it? And for some of us, we're going to be a bit more conservative, while others are going to be a bit more aggressive. And in your plan, how much of a contrarian are you really? Well, today my guest is Myles Wakeham, and he's going to introduce us about what it's like to live an unconstrained life. Myles is an Australian who migrated to the US in 1989 and has since become a multi-millionaire. And he lives 100% free and unconstrained life. It means there's no job, nothing holding him back. And yet he never graduated high school, let alone even went to college. And he made his fortune in biotech industry and in Bitcoin. And since then, he's had a portfolio that's really expanded into rental properties and other real estate. So welcome to the show today, Myles. How are things?
Things are great. How are you?
I'm doing really well. And so you're living in the US now, right? So whereabouts in the US are you staying?
Scottsdale, Arizona.
Oh, Scottsdale's gorgeous, just gorgeous. Right on. Now, listen, I had in the introduction, I had mentioned that you had a life-changing experience, right? And this is about 30 years ago, I think it was. And it really changed the direction in your life. And I wonder if you don't mind telling us a little bit about that experience and how it is you got to doing what you're doing today.
Okay. I had a couple of life-changing experiences. It seems like in my particular case, I have a series of these things. If I go back in time and try to work it out from the very early start, I think that probably when I was about 22 years old, I was living in a city in South Australia called Adelaide. And I had left home. I was one of these people who went into business very early on. I was starting my own business when I was 15 years old, and I left school to pursue it and did quite well out of it. I was in the software technology business in the late 70s. So I was on an emerging wave going up as the industry went up. But when I was 22, I was out with some friends, and I got home to find a message on my answering machine from my mother that my father had been taken to the hospital in an ambulance, and she was distraught. And so I jumped in the car and went home and found out that he had a heart attack, and I called the hospital and found out that he had passed away. And I was an only child, so everything was on my shoulders, and I had to look after her best interest, but go through my own grief. And I think that when you're 22 years old and you bury a parent, as I had to, you question your life and you question their life, because I had to put the pieces together of what my father's life looked like and things that he'd never told me about, his finances, his his will, his, those sorts of things, which are not a conversation that, a father has with his son. But, you find it out because it's in his desk and it's in his notes, and you put it all together. And what I found was a man who had been what I guess most of us would call a company man. He was dedicated to his job, worked at the same company for 40 years. He had retired about 2 years prior. So he only really got 2 years of retirement after he finished his career. And he retired at 65, like many people do. But when I went back to look over the whole thing, and effectively weeks later, after there was autopsies done and we found out what really caused this heart attack, was the heart attack certainly killed him. But what led up to it was that he had asbestosis, which is cancer of the lung. He had worked for a company all of his life that made roofing products. And unfortunately, back in those days, they didn't realize that asbestos was carcinogenic. Yeah. And his dedication to his company came at really at the cost of his life. And with that, my mother and my, freedoms went down. And I looked at the whole situation and I sort of said, there, but for the grace of God, go I. Mm-hmm. I don't want to go down that path. I don't want to be the company man. I'm not going to give my life to an employer who really doesn't have my back. And if this is the reward you get after 40 years of service, I'm not giving service. It's simple as that. That led to me years later, after my mother had been established, she was stable and everything was fine. I ended up leaving Australia. I ended up moving to the United States. I got married and lived in California for about 6 years. And then one day got a phone call from back home that my mother had a car accident and I had to go back. So I said to my wife, who was American, I need to go back and take care of my mother. And she said, okay, fine, I'll come with you. So she came and we moved back to Australia. And after I had my adventures in America and I went back, I realized about 6 months after I got there and stabilized everything that she was less likely somebody who could travel to a foreign country than I was. And we ended up getting a divorce and she ended up leaving. And I found myself I guess I was about 32 years old. I found myself in a pretty dark place. And I remember it was around about the time of the holidays. And some friends of mine came over to the house I was at and they said, look, you can't be sitting around here over Christmas and New Year's Eve depressed and, living in this dark place. You need to come with us. We're going to go to drive it's about a 2-day drive, but we're going to go to the other side of Australia to a state called Queensland. We're going to hit the beach. The weather's beautiful. We're going to have New Year's Eve there and it's going to be great. And I said, yeah, okay, whatever. That was kind of my attitude, because I wasn't really all that into it, but I said, fine, I'll do it. So we did. We drove 2 days. We got there. We had the time that they explained. And then on the way back, on the second day of driving back, unexpectedly, my friend who was driving, I was in the back of the car and his girlfriend was in the passenger seat in front of me and he was driving. And we were in the middle of the outback of Australia, cutting through the countryside, and unexpectedly he went over a rise. And the next thing I hear is splash, which, Australia is a desert, effectively. You don't hear a lot of splash out there in the desert. What had happened is he'd driven into a flash flood and the car had hit it at a very high rate of speed, probably 80 mile an hour. And it was skipping over the water like a stone would if you were to throw it over the ocean. And it ended up head-oning into an oncoming truck coming in the opposite direction. And it killed his girlfriend who was sitting in front of me. It didn't kill him and it destroyed me. I ended up losing half of the use of my body. And then the worst part about it was I remember when they were cutting me out of the car that his girlfriend was lying on top of me. Oh, and I was saying to the firefighter, who had the jaws of life, I said, forget me, get her, right? Get her. And he just ignored it. He wouldn't respond to me. He didn't say a word. And eventually they kind of pull you out of the car and what's left of you. And that was when I realized she was dead and she broke her neck. She was lying on top of me all that time and I didn't know. And you come face to face with all these things that, they say sometimes bad things happens in threes. I had the divorce. Now I had the car accident. And then what eventually found out as I was recuperating in hospital was that my ex-wife had come in and effectively raided all the money we had. And so I returned back to Australia as a millionaire at the age of 32, which was really unusual, and lost pretty much everything. And at that point, I'd lost a marriage, almost lost my life, and lost all my money. And I came to that place where you sort of look at yourself and you go, what's going on here? You know, do I want to continue down this path? Do I want to, you know, is this going to be my life? Right. And I said, you know what? To hell with it. Of course it is. I'm going to make the best I can out of the situation. And I ended up a year or so later, I met a girl and we fell in love, and I got married again. And then we had a baby, and I was living a life of repair, but a life it had meaning and it had substance and it felt great. And I felt like I can get myself back on the ascendant path, you know. And then in 1999, I got a phone call from a buddy of mine I worked with back in California. And he said, there's this thing going on here called the .com boom. Get your butt on a plane, get over here. We got work for you. And I'm like, sure, I'll take it. So I left my family in Australia. I came to California again. And this time, another time, I came with nothing more than a suitcase of clothes. I had no money. And within a year, I called my wife when I got there, and I said, you're not going to believe how much money in business there is here. We need to go over here. I can actually support my family from here. I can't do it from Australia. She said, sure, I'm up for an adventure. So she came, and she's a far better traveler than my previous wife was. And for the last 20 odd years, we've lived in the United States. And the funny thing is, after about 3 or 4 years of being back, I was a millionaire again. I had made my money this time through real estate, and I thought I did it. You know, I thought this time it meant something. It wasn't like it was, I got a bunch of stock options, which is how I made it the first time, and I didn't deserve it. This time I deserved it. Right. Especially what I'd been through. I thought, hell, if I can get through that and get through anything, and look at this, here's the prize. Enjoy it, Myles. Get yourself a nice big home, a decent car, and you can, raise your family with pride and do, the things guys do, right?
Yeah.
So that was great until 2008 happened, and we lost everything in the crash. You couldn't write this shit, man.
No kidding.
So I thought, here's the weird thing. When 2008 happened, we were lucky. We had some property in Australia as well as some property in the United States. And although we lost our shirt in the US, we were doing quite well in Australia. So I sold all the property we had in Australia. We took the profits, paid down our debts in the States, and we still had a bit of money left over. And then I was sitting in the veranda outside of our house with my wife, and we'd been through this hellish, stressful period that everyone went through back then. And I said to her, you know what? Let's not do what everyone else does. Which means I said, we've never made our money doing what everyone else did. If I was going to do that, I would have been like my father, and I would have been the company man. I didn't want to be the company man. Why don't we buy everybody else's foreclosures? We believe in real estate. We believe in Maslow's hierarchy of needs. We believe in roof over people's heads, shelter. So we did. And within 2 years, we'd made all our money back and some. Within 4 years, I was 5 times worth more than I was at the best of times. And then it just so happened to add some sort of a benefit to all of that. In 2011, because I was working in technology, I discovered Bitcoin, and I bought a ton of it because I was using it to pay workers who were working for me in foreign countries. It was a much easier way to do it. Mm-hmm. And then when the price went through the roof, I hung on to everything, and the rest is history. So you add all of these things together, and I guess I feel a bit like I've been on a roller coaster ride all my life, from peaks and troughs, from ups and downs. But I also realized that one experience that, happened when they were pulling me out of that car, that it told me, man, if you can get through that, you can get through anything. And if we all had that experience, I've got a lot of friends who are vets who have served in Iraq, Afghanistan. They've had their mates killed. They've been blown up, the whole bit. They've got PTSD. And these are good people. Mm-hmm. These are good, honest people. They are honorable. They gave their heart and their soul to their country, what they thought they were doing that was right. And these poor bastards never got rewarded for it. And I look at their experience and I look at mine and I'm like, dude, we're going to pull you out of that hole, right? They pulled me out of that car. We're going to pull you out of that mental hole, and we're going to let you take what you've learned to never, ever feel that life can get on top of you ever again. And if we can do that in some way, we all win.
No kidding, my friend. No kidding. That is an incredible, incredible story. And not just one or two things, but three things that you've lived through. And each time, what really resonates with me is the mindset that you had of how that this is not going to define me. It is going to be a part of me, and I'm going to take advantage of what it's going to teach me. And you move forward. And how many of us struggle in life and stay stuck in the victim side of it? And it doesn't sound like you spent too much time there. Obviously, we're human. We're going to be back and forth and fluctuate in that. But you were able to pull yourself up by the bootstraps and really look at, like, I'm given an opportunity here to do something with my life. And you've gone out to do that.
Yeah. Yeah. I think the key thing, which I realized I learned as a child, was that and this is probably the DNA of any entrepreneur, because I know you probably have a lot of entrepreneurs who listen to your show. We're problem solvers, right? Back down to the basics. That's what we do. We solve problems, and hopefully we make some money in the process. But our goal here is to solve problems. And if you're a good problem solver, you will find creative way of doing it. When everyone tells you, no, that can't be done, you'll say, no, let me show you. And you'll discover the way to solve a problem. And the really interesting thing, which kind of puts a connection point on the very end of this, because this story never stops. I mean, all of our lives, we're just chapters in a book that goes from one to another, right? And I'm no different. In 2019, before COVID, I was still carrying around the disability of this accident from 25 years prior. And I realized that it wasn't going to get any better. And I remember I woke up one morning and what had happened is I was hit down the left side of my body, and everything from my shoulder down was destroyed. But thankfully, I never lost the use of my fingers. So that was good. But in Australia's medical system is not as good, I'm sure, as Canada's or as in the US. Well, if you've got money. But it's not great. It's rationed medicine. And as a result, when they put me back together again, it was kind of like military grade triage. And I've been carrying around this sort of half-baked job for 25 years. And I realized I couldn't afford to get it done in the US. I mean, I probably could have, but the cost would have been enormous. And I couldn't go back to Australia to do it either. There was a whole legal thing going on with that barred me from, I wasn't a tax-paying resident of the country anymore, so I wasn't able to get access to their medical. So I thought, this is my lot. I'm stuck with this sort of thing. Yeah. And then I started traveling again, and I ended up meeting a lot of people all over the world, and ended up in Mexico. And I discovered from talking to various expats who were living down there that then there was a lot of people, particularly vets, who were down there that had been through similar things, and they were telling me how good the medical was there. And I ended up taking the courageous position of going to Guadalajara and seeing a surgeon and asking him, Doc, can this be fixed? And he happened to be one of the best surgeons in orthopedics in Latin America. And he said, I can fix that. And I said, you know what? I'm going to have to put my trust in somebody, right? So how much, Doc? And he gave me a price and I could afford it. It's not very expensive down there. And I said, do it. And so in 2019, I was in Guadalajara in Mexico on the stretcher, carved me up, put me back together again. And to this day, I can do everything with my arms I could have, I would have loved to have been able to do for the last 25 years. Wow. So yeah, they put me back together again. Again, though, and this is something very interesting. Meanwhile, everywhere you look on the news, everywhere, you talk to somebody going to Mexico, oh, watch out, the drug cartels, watch out, they'll behead you, you lose everything, you'll get shot. It's a load of crap. It's so untrue. And then you go down there and these guys give you another lease on life.
Yeah.
And you want to hear the weirdest story? When he was when they were doing an MRI on my shoulder, he pulls me back to the office and he says, I'm going to show you this MRI. And he shows me this thing up on the wall. And I don't know much about this. I'm not a doctor. And he says, you see that kind of blurry bit there in the shoulder by the rotator cuff or whatever it was? I said, yeah. He says, yeah, that's a tumor. I'm like, oh shit. He goes, I think it's benign, but I'm so happy you came to me because we're going to get that sucker out of here. Get ready. We're going into surgery in a couple of days.
Wow.
So dodge a bullet, dude.
No kidding. That's incredible.
Yeah.
Wow. So listen, let's get into a few other things here. I wanted to know, one of the questions you had, I wanted to ask you was, why should people throw out this traditional concept of what retirement is, like the whole idea around retirement? Now, you talked a little bit about your dad, but maybe expand a little bit more on what you mean by that.
I learned a lesson with this whole thing, looking in retrospect, looking in the reverse against, the life journey. And I think I kind of summed it up by trying to get a handle on what one's life experience was. I kind of came up with this concept of what I call the 4 quarters of life. And the idea of the first quarter is when you're with your parents, you're learning how to talk and walk and socialize and learn at school and all of those things. And then at the age of like 20 or so, you go into the second quarter, which I often call the building phase. You're building a life, a career, an identity, a marriage, a house, all the things that we build. Then the third phase is kind of one of those sort of optimization phases where you're trying to get your investments just right and get everything squared away, because that fourth quarter is coming, that final chapter in which your body's going to give out on you and you're going to go down to the big guy in the sky at some point. So at some point, I kind of feel like we need to be able to look at life from all quarters. And one of the things that I did was I looked backwards, I looked in reverse. And I realized that there was a setup going on. And what the setup was, particularly noteworthy in the United States, is that at the age of 18 here, they get the student who's gone through the high school guidance counselor or whatever they call it, and they sit him down at home around the kitchen table with the parents, and they put this contract in front of them. And it's a student loan contract. And it says, you're going to go to college, kid, because that's going to be your path to the middle class. And whatever you want to do, you want to be in the middle class, because if you're not, you're going to get left behind. You're going to be excluded from all life's beauty. And this is how it's sold to him. And that kid doesn't know any better. The kid's 18, right? He's going to sign his name to a contract. Legally, he can. Yeah. And the contract might be hundreds of thousands of dollars of debt. But meanwhile, that kid in most states in the United States can't go into a bar and order a beer. He's not allowed to. And I started realizing, why is it that bankers get exception, whereas bartenders don't? What's the rule here? And then I sort of played it forward and I realized that kid goes into the second quarter, his building quarter, and maybe he's lucky enough to have been able to pay his student loan debt off, or he's got it manageable, and some bank comes along and says, you want to buy a house because you've got this new family, you've got a kid coming on and you want the whole bit. So what are you going to do? We're going to give you a 30-year mortgage. Well, the literal translation of the word mortgage in French is death contract.
Yeah.
Right? So we're going to give you a death contract and you're not even in the second quarter. You're only in the second quarter of your life. And so all of a sudden, now you've got student loan and you've got the mortgage. And of course, that's 30 years of your life. Well, if you got that mortgage at, say, the age of 30 because the student loan pushed you that far into it, that means by the age of 60, if you do the math and you just paid this off as you agreed to, you didn't refinance it 5 times and pay off those credit cards you let go loose or whatever. At the age of 60, you own your house. But the age of 67 is when my father died. And I look at the whole thing and go, this is nuts. This doesn't make sense. But it's a setup, because what they want you to do is to sell your future out for this supposed fictional benefit. And some people, it works. Look, don't get me wrong. There's great people out there who've done great things with tertiary education, doctors, lawyers, engineers. They do great things. They build our society. But there are many, 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 many more that didn't.
That's right.
Right. And we don't look at statistics. 65% of all students that go in the United States go to college do not end up pursuing a career that had anything to do with what they were taught in college. Would you spend $100,000 to do that?
It's insane, isn't it?
From a business standpoint, it makes 0 sense. And then if you look at the mortgage process and you look at how the banks have set everybody up, this is why only 30 or so % of people who in the United States reach retirement age can actually afford to retire, because you can't afford to retire with a mortgage. And if you did refinance that, because let's face it, life happens, and you may need to pull some money out to get through some COVID or whatever it is, and now all of a sudden you can't retire. Well, that's the end of you. You're going to work until the day you die. And this is a setup. And who benefits? That's when you have to look at this. Who benefits from this? It's the banks.
Yeah.
The banks that traverse international borders, the banks that traverse the law, the banks that operate unilaterally, and the banks that enslave countries into debt so that the countries cannot refute the bank's request in the case of the United States to say you can never discharge a student loan through bankruptcy. This is a setup. If you don't see it for what it is, then you become victim to it. And what I did was I said, if that's the climate, if that's the domain, the canvas in which I'm painting my life's picture on, I don't want to paint on that canvas. I'm going to do exactly the opposite of everybody else, and let's see how I do. And I found out that when I did that, when I made that choice, I got 10 to 100 times the rewards that everybody else who didn't do that, who went with the herd, got. And that changed my direction. It changed my life, and it gave me a sense of what I should be doing with my life. And now I'm in my 50s. I haven't had a job for 20 something years. I spend half of my time, when COVID allows, to roam the planet. This is crazy. I just bought a bullfighting ring in the center of Mexico.
I was going to ask you about this.
And I'm developing it into luxury property, and I'm building a world-class recording studio there, which is a passionate job that I've wanted to do for 20 years. These are my adventures, and they don't stop now, but this is just what I do. And people look at me and go, you're crazy. You do all these crazy things. It's like, you know what? When I die, I'm going to have a story to tell. I don't want to have a bank account with so many zeros on it. That's not going to help me when I'm dead. What's going to help me is that I don't look back in my life with regret. Yeah. And I feel like I'm building something which may have some sort of legacy to it. And if that legacy is to help other people awaken and see this stuff for what is going on, then so be it.
Well, that's so great to hear. The challenge, Myles, is that most of us don't recognize, can't see what you just put in front of us about that being 18 years old and, getting them to sign that contract and not really understanding what we've done, or jumping into the mortgage and I know my first house, my first wife and I married my high school sweetheart, and unfortunately that marriage didn't work out because at some point we got into a position financially where we were house rich and cash poor, right? So nice big old house and just not enough income to come through. And lo and behold, a few other things were going on as well. And I ended up by losing everything. And it's been a battle ever since to come back and rebuild life. And when that happens, when you're 30, you've lost 15, 18 years of your life to get started again. And so it's really important that people understand what you're saying, is that we understand the things that we're doing to ourselves each and every day, especially when it comes around managing our finances and how we're doing things. And so you started to talk a little bit about statistics and numbers, and obviously that's also another passion of yours. Otherwise you wouldn't be as successful as you're at. But what are some other specific stats that represent the greatest threat for personal freedom in the US and probably in Canada as well?
There is a study that was done by the Boeing Corporation. I think it was about 7 or 8 years ago. And it became quite noteworthy I think the BBC did a big expose on this article. It was one of those things where so many of these kind of studies get quashed or pushed aside because they don't follow a narrative. But in this particular case, they were very valuable. The study was that the pension program of the Boeing Corporation has to be funded with money, and they're trying to work out how much money they need to fund it with. And so if you work for Boeing, it's like kind of like my father, who was a company man, works for the same corporation all their life. And, you know, at what point, how much money do you need to fund it so they can give them a pension when they retire? So they did a study that said that what is the average life expectancy of somebody who works in the Boeing Corporation? And they broke it into two categories. One is somebody who retires at the age of 55 and somebody who retires at the age of 65. So they're trying to work out how much money they need. At 55, they discovered that the average life expectancy of a US male was 83 years. So they worked out they had to fund, if my math serves me, about 28 years worth of retirement on average.
Yeah.
They did exactly the same study for 65. What they discovered was the average life expectancy of somebody who worked at the Boeing Corporation, male, until the age of 65, they only lasted 18 months after they retired, on average.
Whoa.
When I heard that story and I read that, I saw my father. And I'm like, oh my gosh, this is not an isolated case. This is about how old you are and how your mind has to transition from what you identify with, and that is your work, to what you become in your retirement. And at certain age points, the stress that builds to your life can have so much of an impact on your physiological, your biology, heart attacks, strokes, cancer, that all of a sudden it's like, this is real. And I was telling this story. I was in Phoenix giving a speech to a bunch of people who are into the financial independence, retire early movement. And I was trying to tell them, you know, retiring early might be a very powerful thing, but I think the idea of retiring as it unto itself is not necessarily a great idea. But from the point of view of retiring early, I get your point. And then I told this story about my father, and I told this story about the Boeing Corporation. And I finished, and I was at the Lantern afterwards, and this lady came up, and I thought, oh, here we go. I'm going to get somebody who's going to argue with me over a point. You know, it's whatever. It's fine. I don't mind. She comes up and she shakes my hand. She goes, she introduced herself as a retired CFO. So what's that? Chief Financial Officer, who worked at the Honeywell Corporation. Honeywell here in Phoenix is a big defense contractor. Yeah. And she goes, I heard you talking about the Boeing study. I said, yeah, I know. You probably work in a bank and you're probably going to tell me it's all BS. And, you know, she goes, I worked at Honeywell all my life, and we went through the exact same process to fund our pension programs. And I can tell you, we came up with the identical numbers Boeing had. And I thought, oh, wow. So that means there's a number of takeaways from this. But the first one is, don't ever have a bucket list. Get on that list and work that list right now, right? If you're saying, I want to climb Machu Picchu, do that damn thing, right? So I had this crazy idea. I wanted to climb the Pyramid of the Sun in Mexico City, and I did. And then I went back there a year ago, and the Mexican government stopped everyone from climbing it because they were trying to keep the architectural integrity of the, archaeological integrity of the place. So I'm sort of glad I did, but that wasn't the reason. The thing is, I did it because I'm in good health and I can do it. I'm not going to do that with a bad hip and a bad back, and therefore, a missed opportunity. And if this is how people are living their lives, they're pushing all these things aside so that the day they retire, they can go and do all these wonderful things. You ain't going to enjoy climbing the Great Wall of China with a bad back, right? Do it now.
No kidding. Absolutely. And so many of us fall into that belief, right? I remember reading a study I think it was out of England as well, and it was about similar about retirement. And what they found in that study was that men, I was focusing on the men's side of it for my work, and it said that men that retired without something to do or purpose died a third earlier than men that retired and then had something more, like something to retire towards. So this idea of, I'm going to wait and do these things doesn't make any sense, right? It just, you got to live for today. And then, yeah, you may retire from your day job, but what are you going to do that sustains and maintains your life, that still gives you passion and energy? Because I watched my father retire, and he passed away a couple of years back. And he really didn't have much to do. Now my mom and him did lots of little crafts and toured around the couple of provinces next door to where I live now, and they enjoyed that, but they really were pretty much sedentary. They didn't have a lot of other things to do. And so I have always said to my wife, that's not how I want to retire. I don't want to retire getting up and wondering what's on the Weather Channel today.
Right.
Because like that's just not a way to live. It's just isn't a way to go.
Well, our society also consumes us with the money side of things, right? All we do is we think about how do we make money so that we can retire, but we don't really ever question whether we should retire. And I don't think that means that you have to live a life always working for somebody, selling you time by the hour or whatever. I'm not a fan of that, but I am somebody who believes that if you're lucky enough at a very young age to be able to establish the right investments in the right things that pay you to own them.
Yes.
And that you have enough of these things, then you can generate enough income to pay your monthly expenses. And, you can start living frugally to keep that number down. But as life goes on and things get better, you'll make more money. And as you make more money, you can increase your lifestyle. You can inflate your lifestyle at that point, but you never get beyond that number. And that way you never have to get out of bed. You're making money, whether you've got rents coming in from real estate or dividend stocks or vending machines or websites or whatever it is that you've got that make you money. That should be your goal. And if you say, look, I'd love to do that, but I got to pay the rent right now, so I'm just going to go off and work for Amazon or whatever you do. Yeah, okay, I get that, but I'll guarantee you'll never get off that treadmill. You need to be able to make a conscious effort at the youngest possible time to be able to be in that process, and then you will have some hope.
Totally agree. And I think it all comes down to, being able to, and you use the word frugal, and I have a 27-year-old. And so he's just started to venture out on his own and his own apartment and working now. And I'm on him. I'm just like, if you can just put even $25 a check away, it's not going to make you rich today. It's not about the $25. It's about building the habit of taking a portion of what comes in, what you bring in, and I'm just not going to look at this piece. And once you're comfortable and you've noticed that, hey, you know what, my lifestyle can manage with 25, well, then go to 50 and then go to 75. And it's just, but you have to start.
Right.
And don't start when you're 40, because that number's too big. And you've probably already signed off your life anyways to a mortgage. It's going to be, you're wrapped around anyways. And so you got to start small enough so that you can live with that piece that's already happening, and it's a habit and you built it. And I think you were starting to get into my next question, is because I asked the audience here what their definition of financial stability is. And I'd really like to get what your concept and idea of financial stability is all about.
I use the term financial sustainability, and a lot of that comes from being raised in a big country with a few people in it. I guess Canada shares that in common. We can earn so much from the land, and one of the things that is important, I think, is that we respect that, and that we understand that if you plant the right seed, the crops will yield something that you can bring to market and sell. And that's just a simple matter of getting through each month and thinking about, what is my burn rate? What is it costing me for my family, for my life, to do what I need to do to be able to survive and thrive, but not at a point that is, you don't need Lambos. You don't need all, champagne and caviar. If you want that, that's fine. But don't try and reward yourself before you've won anything, right? I mean, it's okay to defer gratitude. It is. But if you can do that for a while and you can get that burn rate down, the goal would be make that burn rate by things that don't require you to work to get them. And that is the key. If you can do it with 5 or 10% of your average time invested in those things, they will serve you. And yes, they are front loaded. You've got to put a bit of time to build that building or get that rental property prepped up or research these stocks. You've got to put time into that. But that's finite. Once you've done that, then don't have anything that takes you more than 15 hours a week to run them. If you do that, and the greatest test of this is COVID. I was one of the very unlucky people to get COVID in May of 2020, at the time when no one knew what the hell it was and everyone was dying. And I thought, oh my God, here we go again. But I got through it. I didn't have a big issue. But what happened to me was I couldn't work. Not that I work per se, but I couldn't even just get out of bed. And I started realizing the power of owning things that were paying me to own them when I could not be there to attend to them. And if you can put that sort of an acid test on what you're doing in your life, and if you can say, I don't care whether I get sick for a month, 2 months, 3 months, I will be financially okay because of the way that I've structured my life, you are sustainable. You're almost bulletproof. Now, there's no guarantees in life here, but it's enough for you to have the time. And then what you do with that time, that's when you can go and do those speculative things or have those life experiences or do the things that you will get quantum levels of returns on. That's what rich people do. You know, rich people don't have jobs. People forget that. The rich don't have jobs. It's that simple.
Yeah, so true. Absolutely. Because they have the money's working for them. It's not in reverse.
Yeah, they have that.
It's a mindset.
Right. Exactly. And that's really the key. I mean, if you can establish that point in your life, and it won't happen immediately, it's incremental. It takes time. Good things take time. And if you're willing to be patient and you're willing to just put in the effort and front load those things so they eventually will pay you back, have enough of them, and you will reach that point, that crossover where your income exceeds your burn rate. And that is when you're financially free. People think, oh, I have to go and save up $2 million to have enough money to retire or whatever. No, you don't. If you know that your monthly costs are going to be $5,000 a month, that's what you need to earn. And as long as you don't have to toil to earn it, you are financially free.
Exactly. So that's so good. So we've been talking a lot about money. I just want to have one more piece. I want to put a bow on this. And because one of the things I want to touch on is about this concept of what toxic debt is all about and what that looks like. And if you could describe what you mean by toxic debt.
Well, some debt is okay. And what I mean by that is I'm not a fan of debt. Firstly, debt is selling your future out. And as we've explained, you know, we only get one life, and to sell it, to degrade it to the level that you're willing to sell it out to a bank for, you know, for these things, these stimulations that you get is just insane. And that could be said true of a credit card or a car you can't afford or whatever. But those things that don't yield you any sort of a benefit are toxic debts. But sometimes you do need to use other people's money to establish and plant the seed that grows into a crop that yields you a return. And real estate's one of the best examples of that. Now, I learned this lesson, a very interesting thing. You know, when you get a bit of time on your hands, you tend to travel. And back in, I think it was about 2016, I found myself in Venice, Italy. And I was watching a very interesting documentary from a gentleman, Niall Ferguson, I think it was, called The Ascent of Money, I think is the name of it. And he talked about money and banking and how it all began. And the story was a crazy kind of a hack. But back in the Roman era, in the city of Venice, I guess it's probably sometime around about, maybe it was later, I guess like 1100, 1200 AD, sometime around then. The law of the land in Italy was that you were not allowed to lend money. And that's because of passages in the New Testament of the Bible that would look look negatively on the process of charging interest to somebody to loan money. And that took all the incentive out of it for anybody who had money who was going to loan it to somebody. And so they were very dedicated to this because it was a religious edict and nobody was going to, question it. But on the mainland of Italy, where the farmers were and where the crops were, there was a big problem because they would bring their food to market in Venice. But the problem is there was no food and the city was starving. And the reason was that they couldn't afford to buy seed and then to get labor to plant the seed so that they could grow the crops. And they needed debt. They needed credit. They needed to take on money to get the seeds to be able to do it, or the city never had anything to eat. So in this little back corner of Venice, there's this area called the Carnegie, and it's called the Jewish ghetto, basically. And what the Jewish people did was they realized, well, we don't subscribe to the New Testament. We're the old guys. We don't have anything in there that says we can't loan money. In fact, we actually can specifically loan money to Gentiles and charge them interest as long as it's reasonable. And so what we'll do is we'll take this little town square in this little corner of the Carnegie and we'll create we'll take what we used to be pawnbroker shops or, used shops, and we'll turn them into what has become investment banking or banking. There was a red one, a black one, and a green one. And it's because of these things, these colors, that we use terms in finance like in the black, in the red, and green representing money. It's because of the colors of these shops. Anyway, the rule, what eventually happened was the Jewish people lent all the money to the farmers who grew the crops and sold it back to the people in Venice, and then paid the loans off, and then they became wealthy. And as a result, eventually the Roman system adopted the Jewish hack, if you like, of all of this. That's what non-toxic debt looks like. Right? When you can borrow money for a purpose to gain wealth, and there is no reason why you can't do that as long as you feel that it's not a speculation. You're not borrowing money to buy Dogecoin, right? You're borrowing money because you feel that something is a solid investment. Now, what I use as a basis of determination of what would be a solid investment is to work on the principle of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Albert Maslow, who was a psychologist in the 1960s, published this kind of pyramid diagram he calls the hierarchy of needs. At the very base of it, the base level, what we call human physiological needs, effectively food, shelter, clothing. If you focus your attention towards those things, because we as a species need it for survival, you can never really go wrong. And as you go up the pyramid, at the very, very top of the pyramid is what they call self-actualization. And that is that you reach a place of ascent in your life where you've had all the experiences, you have the wisdom, and you can now give back. And that's a lot of billionaires, they do this philanthropic activities and whatever. They're at the self-actualizing point of the pyramid. We don't have to be billionaires to achieve that, right? A father can do it to their kids. They can teach them. They can lead them down a path. These are part of our life's journey. It's part of Maslow's self-actualizational path. But if you're looking at it from a financial standpoint, it has a lot of relevance, because if you focus your investments at the lowest level of the pyramid, no matter whether times are good or times are bad, you will make money. And therefore, to take on debt to buy shelter is, in my opinion, a no-brainer. I remember when I was in Australia, as a kid, I was running a business there, and I would meet a lot of people in business. I remember a lot of people would tell me, I tell you what the best investment is, Myles. And I'd say, what's that? What is the best investment? Buy a pub. I said, why would you want to buy a pub? Why is that a great investment? And he said, you know why? When times are good, people go and celebrate in the pub. And when times are bad, people go and drink themselves into a stupor in the pub. And that's what I remember that. I mean, I've never bought a pub, but I remember that's really the key, right? You go with what works in all climates, and physiological needs are important. So therefore, I would say debt that generates wealth like they did in the Carnegie in Venice is not toxic. And B, debt that focuses on physiological need and not options or not things that are of high risk or speculation would also not be toxic. All other forms of debt, get rid of it. It'll eat you alive.
Makes complete sense to me, my friend. Makes complete sense to me. Well, this has been outstanding. I want to thank you so much, Myles, for spending the time with me today. And we unpacked quite a bit about what it means to live an unconstrained life. And I know that's what your website is. But how else can folks get a hold of you? Is there anything else that we can add for the folks today?
Well, everything I do is over at my website, which is beunconstrained.com. My podcast is there, my articles, my teachings, my courses, everything is there. And it's pretty much 90% all free. We even have a thing called a matrix server where we encourage a community of people to come in. There's no cost to it. And it's like a potluck of ideas. And we're all active on there talking about things like investment opportunities. I was talking with somebody today who brought up an idea of something he wanted to invest in. And I was giving him a devil's advocate position on it. But we do this because these are the conversations we have. If we don't work as a community, we lose the plot, because the stuff that I'm telling you about, it's not in books. It's not, maybe it is somewhere, but it's not in the standard. You're not going to find this at a university course. You're not going to find this in high school economics. It's the basics are there, yes, but the life stories aren't coming from those sort of people. I mean, your high school guidance counselor is probably not a millionaire. So taking advice from them is probably not a great idea, but that's just me.
Yeah, no, fair enough. Totally true. Well, I want to thank you so much, Myles, for being here. I'm going to put all that information in the show notes for this, folks, so we won't have too far to go and find it. And I really encourage you to reach out to Myles and join his community. Such a ton of great information just in this podcast alone. And I'm sure there's so much more there. So thank you so much again, Myles, and have a good one.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Evolving Man podcast. Are you ready to own your destiny? To become more the man you are destined to be? Join the brotherhood that is The Awakened Man at theawakenedman.net and start forging a new destiny today.